Welcome to today's collective reading. Just jump right into it here for us. So in the 3D, there seems to have been somewhat of a taming of a conflicting situation, be it internal or external. Even if it's an external experience, it's definitely something that can be triggering within self as everything mirrors back to you. A dynamic present within you to be healed, to be transmuted, to be addressed. And this battle was very hard won. But you seem to have even surprised yourself a bit here with how you came through with that. From the higher perspective, there was lessons to be learned when it came to a misleading voice interceding between you and your higher self. That came through with one of the clarifying aspects in a reading I did earlier as well, where the feminine aspect, the receptive aspect, was being sabotaged in their connection with their higher self. That receptive higher self aspect was being kind of meddled with, and you've overcome this. You've secured somewhat of a triumph over it, the battle, but you're in this kind of awkward limbo at this moment because assertively you know that any kind of conflict that's currently present in this dynamic is somewhatly frivolous. You can walk away from it. It doesn't have to be a problem anymore. You just call judgment on it yourself. You say, I'm giving to this or I'm not. And you either walk away or you change it. And balancing this, because that is the Five of Wands upright, is the Temperance card upright. So you're balanced. You're owning your ability to make that change. That divine spark within you that you have to create your own reality. The influence that you have with where you give your focus and your time to, you own this. You know that this is something that doesn't need to stand in your way, really. It's only there because you are deciding it gets to be there or not. And what's interesting here is in the receptive energy, we also have the Five of Wands coming out upright, but it's also paired with the Four of Wands. So both sides of you are addressing these energies, creating balance, deciding what doesn't get to stay anymore, what does, what you give to, what you don't. Almost a demand for these energies to no longer be, to no longer have access, because your Four of Wands upright is paired with Temperance. So this is something you have overcome, but you took the time to fully investigate it and fully learn the lesson. So it's possible for some of you, you're not going to be having to deal with this challenge to this extent again in another life. Your soul has somewhatly mastered this. It may be somewhatly reviewed, but not to this extent. For some of you, this was a very challenging experience because you were so thorough in your desire to learn it, to not have to come back to it again, to this degree of a deep dive into the study of it, if you will. We're going to move into the next placement here. So with what you know that you've learned from this, you have been encouraged to be silent, to be quiet of what you know, to be secretive almost. It's possible even that with what kind of came out earlier, that your higher self has been kept from sharing some of this information with you. And this was allowed to protect you, as well as to make sure you fully learned this, to not have to revisit it, because this, for some, has been very, very confusing, very frustrating, and thus emotionally taxing, but you have overcome. You know who you are because of the Temperance card. You know who you are. And from the higher perspective coming down, so the forest looking into the tree perspective, there's the Six of Wands upright. So this is something that you were beginning to feel as though maybe would just not be. And because you owned that experience of that possibility, you finally looked at that. It's not something that will never be, because you finally entertained what it would be like if it wasn't, right? You looked at the full circle, not just at the part of the circle you wanted to see. And you did that because you were so protective of this vision, this dream that you have, this desire, which is affirmed with the Nine of Wands and the Strength inverted. You seem to have this misperception within yourself, this stubbornness, in other words, to not look there until you absolutely had to for whatever reason. And more than likely there's a reason for that. You were buying yourself as much time and those around you as much time to maneuver to give yourselves the most likely chance to really enjoy that dream. And I'm pointing this out because the Strength card is inverted. In the receptive energy, this was definitely something that was manifested, co-created. So you have the Magician upright, and we have the Eight of Pentacles and upright, and the Chariot inverted. It was a studying, a learning of how to work with your fears around what you desired most, around what was being created, co-created, to bring balance in. You finally looked at the dark side of that moon, the darkest place within that shadow work, which was what if, light didn't win? What if, right? Like, what if? So you had to look there. You had to look at that final last possibility before you could really bask in the rays of the sun on the light side of the moon, right? You've done a lot of deep dive study with this. You learned a lot of what did not work, what was not successful, so that you could figure out what actually was. And a lot of this study was done through every possible outcome, every possible decision that you could make would take you down a different timeline. So those hypothetical scenarios that you thought you were just possibly troubleshooting in your mind, you were actually interacting to an extent with another timeline. And if you look at this like we're quantum beings, right? If I decide to say yes or no, what are the possibilities? We can infer some of this. So this is definitely far more complex than that, because there's a co-creation present. There's surprises, in other words, things that you don't know. There's a very complex level of creation there. And this has kind of broken down the assumptions you've had about your world, about how things work, about your own ability to create your own life and find the finer details to which you really can create a really large ripple effect change. So in the assertive energy, we have the Ace of Pentacles upright and the Ten of Swords upright. All these different ways you learned, you observed which ones finally led to that Ace of Pentacles not being in the dead end kind of state. You learned what was necessary to bring about what you pursued. This is what you were pursuing, the offer, not being at the dead end. Possibly, maybe a bit of a rebirth kind of a concept. What appears to be one thing is actually another. It could also be that. There's so many different ways that this can present for each individual on this path, and all of them are potent and strong, and each and every one of you in your story is necessary as part of this symphony of experience that we're all living right now. We build off of one another. And I'm speaking to this because in the receptive energy, we have the Sun upright and the Hermit upright. We have a lot of upright cards. You only have the Strength inverted, speaking to fears, and the Chariot inverted, also correlating with the overcoming of and working with those deep fears. Your drive to create that Ace of Pentacles, that beautiful new beginning, that happiness, the surprises present within that, to really be able to embody that. If you know all the beautiful things that are coming for you, it kind of takes away from the spontaneity and the authentic living in the moment if you already know. And that's something that comes from turning within and discovering that deep connection with Source, divine within you, the light, the happiness, the joy, the positive experiences that you've lived in your life that resonate there. That is something in hermit mode, free of influence from any outside voice projecting upon you or that you feel you need to care for or cater to. You really begin to hear that part of you and thus become closer to your ability to manifest because you're in closer relationship with that part of yourself. You're able to hear yourself, your higher self. So even though there was that attempt to sabotage, to interject another voice instead of your higher self in the receptive aspect of self, you were able to know truth from deception because of the time you take in hermit mode to know self, to hear self. There's a different energetic aspect to it. You're being acknowledged for this innocence that you bring to this. Because of that disconnection between you, or that sabotage between you and your higher self, there was a lot that you didn't know. There was a lot of information just missing, or you were made to not be aware of by this sabotage. And because in spite of all of that, in spite of your pain and the agony, your will, you didn't want to create this disharmony or pain or suffering for those that even in hermit mode, you still have an impact on others just by passing them in the hallway or being within their vicinity. You did not want to negatively impact the innocent. So even though you had moved beyond your own personal level of endurance, you still had enough will, enough drive to move forward, even though you couldn't see where you were going or why. You just knew that at that point, the divine had interceded, that when you called for help, help would come. From the higher perspective, looking down, there is this awareness, this watching of you moving through this process, the demonstrating of what would happen, how things could play out if the sabotaging energy did succeed, did rule, take over, consume, if you will. And that was shown to all. That was shown to all. And in spite of this not necessarily being shown to you at a certain point in this experience, on this journey, you move forward anyway because you felt that resonance within self and the desire to protect the innocence around you, as well as your own inner child, that innocent part of you. You move forward because of that. That kept you going forward. So you are being acknowledged, honored for your uniqueness and that original innocence that you bring to it, because you did this in spite of not being fully informed, not being allowed to fully understand what was happening and why. We actually had an extra card come out here in the assertive energy, which is really interesting because it's we have the Eight of Wands upright, and then we have the Queen of Cups and the King of Cups together upright as well. Emotion, intuition, awareness, the giving to. There is going to be some form of forward motion, communication present that is going to be rapid. And if it's not, the desire for it to be will be felt on both sides of the coin. both the receptive and the assertive aspects within self, and thus also reflected back to you outside of you. So if you're more of the receptive aspect predominantly at this time, there's going to be a masculine aspect, an assertive aspect that's also going to be aware of this shift, that's going to want to communicate and give, just as much as the feminine is going to want to communicate and receive, and vice versa. In the receptive energy, there is an awareness of being unbound. That what you were allowed to perceive was deceptive. You yourself, moving about in your daily life, you felt free. You felt yourself. You felt you. But anytime anything would reflect back to you, communicate in any way, there was always a deceptive aspect to it, and that is not something that you will be seeing reflected back to you anymore. This is part of the higher self's plan, because your higher self was aware that this was happening. And it's almost as though your higher self knew this was going to happen, and there has been a plan in place the entire time to completely demask this sabotaging energy and allow its true ugliness to be shown to all of those to which they desired to perceive them the way that they saw you being perceived by these people, these individuals. The true ugliness of their actions is being presented. This was always part of this plan, and this means that you will not have to experience this to this extent again, because you have really dived into it. You've drug it out as long as you possibly can before you fully looked at that darkest part of the dark side of the moon, your shadow work, right? Where the fear of what if the sabotaging was successful. This all culminated. And what if the sabotaging was successful was shown to every energy, every soul, every aspect of your soul family, your soul tribe. Anyone that was meant to know knows the truth. And this energy did not win, and it was demasked. Its ability to hide and pretend that it's you is no longer a thing. It's defeated. And because you did all of this without fully being able to be aware of why you were moving as you were moving, and why the direction was as it was, and why you didn't know, you're being acknowledged for the strength that you had in spite of that innocence to continue to move forward towards light, practically blind. Like, you are being acknowledged for that. So I did pull some Moonology cards as well, just to kind of add a little like overall guidance for everyone, some of affirmations. And what we have here is the last quarter moon in Pisces and the new moon in Cancer, which speaks to talk less, feel more, and relax into that feeling. This seems a lot like an invitation to become reacquainted with your higher self now that there isn't this sabotaging energy interjecting, pretending it is your higher self, when in truth, it's anything but. And then we have the first quarter moon in Taurus and the full moon in Taurus. So what you're creating is coming to completion. So you've created the ability to release control. And you've kind of been forced to, actually. And the detoxifying is coming to fruition. Like, you're detoxing. The more that you own this relaxation and the feeling and connection with your higher self, the more that you'll be able to replace any negative programming that was left or meant to surprise you at opportune moments by the sabotaging energy. So you're detoxing. The more that you spend time with what you feel and connect with your higher self, the more that you will find yourself clearing and releasing of this ugh. And that will conclude today's reading. The divine within me honors the divine within you. Namaste.